The girl's hand shook as she pressed them against the trading post's frost-covered window. Inside, warm light spilled across rough wooden tables, where men counted beaver pelts and silver coins. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. The mark on her forehead still throbbed. A crude cross burned into her flesh, branding her as cursed, unholy, the devil's own. Her breath fogged the glass as she watched the fur trader move among his customers, tall and quiet, with gentle hands that sorted through foxskins like they were made of silk. She didn't know his name yet, didn't know he was about to change everything. But let's go back to the flames, to the screaming, to the moment they decided she was too dangerous to live among decent people. 6 weeks earlier, when the fever took hold of Millfield Township and children started dying in their beds, someone needed to be blamed. The sickness came with the late autumn rains, creeping through houses like smoke, leaving small graves in its wake. Mary Catherine Brennan had been tending the sick, brewing willow bark tea, and sitting vigil with grieving mothers. She was 17, unmarried, and had a gift for healing that some called blessed and others called suspicious. The fever claimed 8 children before it burned itself out. Mary Catherine survived it. That was her first mistake. Pastor Blackwood stood before the congregation that Sunday, his voice trembling with righteous fury. "The devil walks among us," he declared, pointing his gnarled finger toward the back pew where Mary Catherine sat alone. "This plague was sent as punishment for harboring the unholy." Mary Catherine rose slowly, her green eyes meeting his without flinching. "I helped where I could," she said quietly, "same as any Christian should." "You laid hands on the afflicted," Blackwood spat. "You whispered words over the dying. Witchcraft." The congregation murmured, heads turning. Mary Catherine felt the weight of their stares, the shift from sympathy to suspicion. Her own aunt, who had raised her since the cholera took her parents, looked away. "I prayed over them," Mary Catherine said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "In Latin," Blackwood accused. "The devil's tongue." "It was the Lord's Prayer. You taught it to me yourself." But fear had already poisoned their hearts. When Blackwood called for her trial, no one spoke in her defense. They held the trial in the church, with Blackwood as judge and jury. The evidence was damning in its simplicity. She had been present at every deathbed. She knew herbs and remedies. She had green eyes and red hair, marks of the cursed. Most damning of all, she had lived when so many innocents had died. "Guilty," Blackwood pronounced as thunder rolled across the autumn sky. "The mark of Cain shall be upon her forehead, that all may know her nature." Mary Catherine didn't scream when they held her down and pressed the red-hot iron to her flesh. She bit her tongue until blood filled her mouth and stared at the ceiling until the world went black. When she woke, her aunt was packing her few belongings into a worn carpet bag. "You can't stay," the older woman whispered, not meeting her eyes. "They'll stone you if you remain." Mary Catherine touched the bandage covering her forehead. Beneath the cloth, the burn throbbed with each heartbeat. "Where can I go?" Her aunt's hand stilled on the bag. "North, to the territories. Find someone who won't know what you are." "What am I, Aunt Sarah?" Sarah finally looked at her, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Innocent," she whispered. "But that don't matter now." They gave her a horse that limped and provisions for 3 days. Mary Catherine rode out of Millfield as the sun rose, blood seeping through her bandage, the weight of condemnation heavy on her shoulders. For 3 weeks she wandered through settlements and trading posts, but the mark drew stares and whispers wherever she went. Most people crossed themselves when they saw her. Some threw stones. One preacher tried to drown her in a creek, claiming he could wash the devil from her soul. She learned to keep her head down, to pull her shawl low over the branded cross. She learned to go hungry rather than beg. She learned that kindness was rarer than gold and twice as precious. The horse died on a frozen morning outside Broken Ridge, collapsing in the snow without warning. Mary Catherine buried it as best she could with numb fingers and walked the final 10 miles to the trading post, sustained by little more than melted snow and bitter determination. That's where she stood now, outside Jacobson's trading post, watching the fur trader work and wondering if she had the courage to face another rejection. Inside the post, Eric Jacobson counted beaver pelts with methodical precision. 43 prime pelts from the Norwegian trapper, 15 fox from the half-breed who rarely spoke English, 2 wolves from the mountain man with the scarred hands who never stayed long enough for conversation. Eric had been trading fur for 7 years, building his business trap by trap, pelt by pelt. He was 32, unmarried, and content with the solitude that came with frontier life. He'd noticed the girl outside his window twice now. The first time, 2 days ago, she'd stood there for near an hour before disappearing into the woods. Today she was back, thinner, more desperate. Her clothes were too light for the season, and she moved like someone who'd forgotten what safety felt like. "You gonna stand there counting all day, or offer the girl some warmth?" Eric looked up to find Thomas Whitefeather, the half-breed trapper, watching him with knowing eyes. "What girl?" Thomas gestured toward the window. "The one who's been watching you like you might sprout wings and fly away." Eric glanced toward the frost-covered glass. The girl was still there, a thin shadow against the white landscape. "She's probably just passing through." "In weather like this? With no horse? No pack? No sense?" Thomas shook his head. "She's running from something. Or someone." Eric felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. He'd seen plenty of people running from their pasts. Hell, he was one of them. The difference was he'd had money and skills, and the luxury of choosing his exile. This girl had nothing. "Not my business," he said, but his eyes drifted back to the window. Thomas gathered his payment and headed for the door. As he passed, he spoke quietly. "My grandmother used to say the spirits send us exactly the people we need to meet. Question is, are you brave enough to find out why?" After Thomas left, Eric tried to focus on his ledgers, but his attention kept wandering to the window. The girl was still there, swaying slightly on her feet. As he watched, she pressed one hand against the glass as if to steady herself, then slowly sank to her knees in the snow. Eric was outside before he'd consciously decided to move. She was conscious, but barely. Her lips blue with cold, the shawl around her head slipping to reveal. Eric stopped short. A crude cross had been burned into her forehead, the skin still raw and angry despite being weeks old. Around the brand, her skin was pale as moonlight, her red hair tangled with ice. "Miss?" He knelt beside her in the snow. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her green eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I was just so cold." "When did you last eat?" She tried to think, her brow furrowing. "Tuesday? Maybe Monday." Eric scooped her up without another word. She weighed nothing, all sharp angles and hollow spaces. Inside the trading post, he set her in the chair closest to the wood stove and wrapped his heaviest blanket around her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked, ladling soup from the pot that always simmered on his stove. She hesitated, her fingers rising unconsciously to touch the bandage he hadn't noticed before. "Mary Catherine," she said finally. "Mary Catherine Brennan." "I'm Eric Jacobson. This is my place." He handed her the bowl of soup, noting how her hands shook as she took it. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs time to remember what food is." She obeyed, taking small, careful sips. After a few minutes, color began returning to her cheeks. "The mark," she said suddenly, not looking at him. "I should tell you about the mark." "You should eat," Eric said. "Everything else can wait." But Mary Catherine shook her head. "They said I was the devil's property, that I brought the fever that killed the children." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, as if she were reciting someone else's tragedy. "They branded me so others would know to stay away." Eric studied the crude cross burned into her flesh. He'd seen plenty of violence in his years on the frontier, but this calculated cruelty made his jaw tighten. "Who did this?" "Pastor Blackwood." The whole congregation watched. She took another spoonful of soup. "They weren't wrong to fear me. Death follows me like a shadow." "Death follows everyone," Eric said quietly. "Some people just notice it more." She looked up then, surprised by his matter-of-fact tone. "You don't want to cross yourself? Throw salt over your shoulder? I want to know if you'd like more soup." For the first time since arriving, Mary Catherine almost smiled. "Yes, please." As Eric refilled her bowl, he made a decision that would change both their lives. "There's a room upstairs. It's small, but it's warm and private. You can stay as long as you need." "I have no money to pay you." "Didn't ask for any." Mary Catherine set down her spoon. Why are you being kind to me? Eric was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Because someone needs to be. That night, Mary Catherine lay in the small room above the trading post and listened to Eric moving around downstairs. It was the first time in weeks she'd felt truly safe. The bed was narrow but clean, the quilts thick and warm. Through the thin walls, she could hear the wind howling across the frozen lake, but it couldn't touch her here. She touched the bandage on her forehead and wondered what Eric saw when he looked at her. Not the devil's mark, apparently. Not something to be feared or pitied, just a person in need of help. It had been so long since someone had seen her as simply human. The days fell into a quiet rhythm. Eric would wake before dawn to tend the fire and start coffee. Mary Catherine would appear shortly after, drawn by the smell of breakfast cooking. They didn't talk much at first. Eric wasn't much for conversation, and Mary Catherine had learned to guard her words carefully. But slowly, naturally, they began to share the small details of daily life. Eric taught her how to grade beaver pelts, how to spot a prime fox skin from one that would fetch half the price. Mary Catherine proved to have a gift for organization, creating order from the chaos of Eric's record keeping. Your handwriting is better than mine, Eric observed one afternoon, watching her copy entries into his ledger. Aunt Sarah made sure I could read and cipher, Mary Catherine said. Said a woman needed to be able to keep accounts if she wanted to survive. Smart woman. She was. Mary Catherine's pen paused over the page, until she decided I was too dangerous to keep. Eric looked up from the pelts he was sorting. Fear makes people do things they never thought they would. Is that what happened to you? The question hung in the air between them. Eric's hand stilled on the fox skin he'd been examining. What makes you think something happened to me? Mary Catherine gestured around the trading post. This place. It's not a home. It's a hiding place. You've got everything you need to disappear at a moment's notice. Your horse is always saddled. Your rifle is always loaded. Your money is in a bag, not a strongbox. Eric was quiet for so long that Mary Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke. I killed a man in Minneapolis, a banker who was cheating my family out of their farm. His voice was steady, but she could hear the old pain beneath it. Self-defense, but his family had money and connections. I had a choice, hang or run. So you ran. So I ran. He resumed sorting pelts. Been running for 7 years now. Mary Catherine watched his hands move over the furs, gentle despite their size and obvious strength. Do you ever think about going back? Every day. But wanting something and being able to have it are different things. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Mary Catherine pulled the bandage from her forehead for the first time since arriving. The cross was healing, but it would leave a permanent scar, raised and discolored, impossible to hide. Eric glanced up from the trap he was mending and went very still. It's ugly, Mary Catherine said, touching the mark self-consciously. It's cruel, Eric corrected. There's a difference. She looked at him, surprised by the anger in his voice. People who brand other people like cattle, Eric continued, they're the ones who should be marked. So the rest of us know what they really are. Mary Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. No one, not her aunt, not the few strangers who'd shown her kindness, had ever expressed anger on her behalf. The fever really did stop after they branded me, she said quietly. Fevers stop when they're ready to stop. Had nothing to do with you. How can you be so sure? Eric set down the trap and looked at her directly. Because I've seen real evil, Mary Catherine. It doesn't heal sick children, or cry over dead horses, or organize ledgers without being asked. Real evil is what burns crosses into innocent girls' faces and calls it God's work. That night, for the first time in months, Mary Catherine slept without nightmares. Winter deepened, and with it came the trappers. Hardy men who'd spent months in the wilderness. They arrived at Eric's trading post with packs full of pelts and pockets full of loneliness. Most were respectful enough, but some brought trouble. Mary Catherine learned to recognize the signs, the way certain men looked at her, the questions they asked about her situation, the assumptions they made about an unmarked woman living with a bachelor trader. She your woman, Jacobson? asked a trapper named Morrison, jerking his chin toward Mary Catherine as she worked at the counter. She's under my protection, Eric said evenly. Morrison grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. That ain't what I asked. Mary Catherine felt the familiar tension that preceded trouble. She'd learned to read the signs in the weeks since her branding, the way men's voices changed, the way their eyes hardened, the way violence gathered in a room like storm clouds. Might be she's available for conversation, Morrison continued, moving closer to the counter where Mary Catherine stood frozen. She's not, Eric said, and something in his tone made Morrison pause. But the trapper had been drinking, and drink made some men bold in ways that sobriety never would. He reached across the counter toward Mary Catherine's face. Let's see what's under that bandage, sweetheart. I heard tell you've got interesting marks. Mary Catherine flinched back, but Morrison caught her wrist. His fingers were strong, calloused, and they hurt. Let go, she said quietly. Make me? Eric moved faster than Mary Catherine would have thought possible. One moment Morrison was gripping her wrist, the next he was on the floor with Eric's boot on his chest and the business end of a Colt revolver pointed at his forehead. The lady asked you to let go, Eric said conversationally. Next time she asks for something, I suggest you listen. Morrison's eyes were wide, his hands raised in surrender. Easy, Jacobson. Didn't mean no harm. Yes, you did. Eric's voice was still calm, but Mary Catherine could see the fury in the set of his shoulders. That's exactly what you meant. Harm to a woman who's already been harmed enough. He stepped back, allowing Morrison to scramble to his feet. Take your pelts and go trade somewhere else, Eric said. You're not welcome here anymore. After Morrison left, muttering threats under his breath, Mary Catherine and Eric stood in the sudden quiet of the trading post. Thank you, she said finally. Eric was reloading his revolver with steady hands. You don't need to thank me for treating you like a human being. Most people don't. Most people are cowards. He holstered the gun and looked at her directly. I should have stopped him sooner. Mary Catherine shook her head. You stopped him when it mattered. That evening, as they cleaned up from supper, Mary Catherine spoke without looking up from the dishes. Morrison wasn't wrong, you know. I'm not your woman. I'm just here. Eric paused in his sweeping. Is that what you want to be? Just here? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. I don't know what I want to be, Mary Catherine admitted. For so long, I've just been trying to survive. Surviving is good, Eric said. It's a start. He resumed sweeping, but his movements had slowed, become thoughtful. For what it's worth, he added quietly, I'm glad you're here, however you want to define it. Mary Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest, not the desperate gratitude she'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper and more frightening. Hope. Spring came late and sudden, the ice breaking up on the lake with sounds like gunshots. Mary Catherine had been at the trading post for 4 months now, and the rhythms of Eric's life had become her rhythms too. She woke to the sound of him stoking the fire. She fell asleep to the sound of him checking locks and loading weapons. She'd grown stronger, both physically and in spirit. The hollow look had left her cheeks, and though she still wore the bandage over her brand, she no longer flinched when people looked at her. More importantly, she'd begun to hope for a future beyond mere survival. Eric, she said one morning as they inventoried supplies, what happens when the trading season ends? He looked up from the list he was making. What do you mean? I mean, do you stay here? Go somewhere else? I need to know because... She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Because I need to know if you want me to go. Eric set down his pencil and studied her face. Do you want to go? No, she said immediately, then blushed at her own vehemence. I mean, I like it here. I like the work. I like... Me? She nodded, still blushing. Eric was quiet for a long moment. Mary Catherine, there's something I need to tell you. Her heart sank. Here it came. The gentle dismissal. The careful explanation of why she couldn't stay. Why what they'd built over the winter couldn't continue. I'm in love with you, Eric said. Mary Catherine stared at him. What? I said I'm in love with you. Have been for months. Eric's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I know that complicates things. I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You loved me, Mary Catherine repeated slowly. Me, with the mark and the past and the trail of dead children. I love you because you survived all of that and still have kindness in your heart. I love you because you organize my ledgers without being asked, and because you cry when trappers tell stories about their dead horses. I love you because you're brave enough to trust again after every reason not to. Mary Catherine felt tears start in her eyes. The brand is a scar left by evil people. It doesn't define you any more than my past defines me. She crossed the small space between them, reached up, and touched his face with trembling fingers. I love you too, she whispered. I've been afraid to even think it, but I do. Eric caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. Then stay, not as someone under my protection, but as my partner, my wife, if you'll have me. What about the law? What about the people looking for you? Let them look. I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of being alone. Eric's eyes were fierce, determined. If trouble comes, we'll face it together. Mary Catherine stood on her toes and kissed him then, soft and sure. When they broke apart, she was crying. Happy tears? Eric asked. Happy tears, she confirmed. They were married 3 days later by Thomas Whitefeather, who claimed authority as a peace chief of his grandmother's people. It wasn't legal by territorial standards, but it felt more real than any church ceremony could have. They spoke vows by the lake at sunset, promising to protect and cherish each other through whatever storms might come. That night, as they lay together for the first time as husband and wife, Mary Catherine finally removed the bandage from her forehead. I want you to see all of me, she said. Eric traced the raised scar with gentle fingers. You're beautiful, he said, and meant it. Even with the mark? Especially with the mark. It means you survived. It means you're stronger than the people who tried to break you. Mary Catherine closed her eyes and let herself believe him. Summer brought prosperity and peace. The trading post flourished under their joint management. Mary Catherine's organizational skills and Eric's knowledge of furs made them a formidable team. More than that, they were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy, in a way neither had expected to be again. They talked late into the nights, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They worked side by side during the days, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Mary Catherine discovered that Eric hummed while he worked and was surprisingly good at cooking fish. Eric learned that Mary Catherine talked to herself while doing accounts and had an uncanny ability to predict weather changes. Storm coming, she said one afternoon, looking up from the ledgers. Eric glanced at the clear sky visible through the windows. How can you tell? My scar aches when the pressure changes. Eric frowned. Does it hurt much? Not anymore, just aware. She touched the mark unconsciously, like it's reminding me I'm alive. That evening, as predicted, a fierce thunderstorm rolled across the lake. They sat by the fire, Mary Catherine's head on Eric's shoulder, listening to the rain pound against the roof. Do you ever miss your old life? She asked. Which part? The part where I was running from the law or the part where I was alone? She laughed softly. Fair point. What about you? Miss anything about Millfield? Mary Catherine considered. I miss thinking the world was safe. I miss believing that good people were rewarded and bad people were punished. She paused. But I don't miss the person I was. She was naive. Innocence isn't a flaw. Willful blindness is. Eric pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You see clearly now. I see you, she said simply. As autumn approached, bringing with it the busy season, Mary Catherine and Eric settled into the deep contentment of people who had found their place in the world. The brand on her forehead had faded to a thin white line, still visible, but no longer angry or inflamed. She'd stopped covering it entirely. The trouble came, as trouble often does, on an ordinary Tuesday. Mary Catherine was working on inventory when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. Eric was in the back room checking pelts, so she went to the window to look. 3 men sat their horses in front of the trading post, The one in the lead wore a badge and the kind of expression that meant business. Behind him rode two men she didn't recognize, but something about their bearing suggested they were accustomed to violence. "Eric," she called quietly. He appeared beside her, took one look at the riders, and went very still. "U.S. Marshal," he said. Mary Catherine's heart began to pound. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." The marshal dismounted, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. He was a lean man with gray eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd spent years tracking fugitives across hard country. "You, Eric Jacobson?" he called. Eric squeezed Mary Catherine's hand once, then opened the door. "I am. Marshal Tom Hendricks. I have a warrant for your arrest in the killing of Richard Pemberton in Minneapolis, Minnesota." 7 years is a long time to hold a grudge, Eric said calmly. "Murder don't have a statute of limitations." Hendricks stepped closer. "You going to come quiet? Or do we need to make this difficult?" "You're beautiful," he said, just as he had that first night, inside and out. Mary Catherine caught his hand and pressed it to her cheek. "I used to think this mark meant I belonged to the devil. Then I thought it meant I belonged to no one." She smiled. "Now I know the truth, which is, I belong to myself, and I choose to share that self with you." Eric kissed her then, soft and sure, and Mary Catherine felt the last piece of her broken heart slide back into place. Spring returned to the lake country with unusual warmth. Mary Catherine worked in the garden she'd planted behind the trading post, her face uncovered, her scar visible to anyone who cared to look. Most didn't notice it anymore. Those who did seemed to understand that it was simply part of who she was. Thomas Whitefeather stopped by one afternoon with news from the wider world. "Heard tell Pastor Blackwood died over the winter," he mentioned casually as Mary Catherine served him coffee. "How?" she asked, though she found she felt neither grief nor satisfaction at the news. "Fever took him. Ironic, considering." Mary Catherine nodded. "I hope he found peace." Thomas looked at her with something like admiration. "You're a better person than most." "I'm a person who understands that hate is poison," she corrected. "I have too much to live for to waste time on hate." That evening, as she and Eric sat on their porch watching the sun set over the lake, Mary Catherine felt the deep contentment of someone who had finally found her place in the world. "Do you ever think about children?" she asked. Eric's hand tightened on hers. "Do you want children?" "I want your children, if they'll have a mother with a marked face." "They'll have a mother who survived hell and came out stronger," Eric said firmly. "They'll be proud to carry your blood." Mary Catherine smiled, imagining small hands and laughing voices filling their quiet home. "Then yes, I want children." 2 years later, Eric sat on the same porch, holding his infant daughter while Mary Catherine rested inside. The baby had been born with a full head of red hair and her mother's green eyes. She was healthy and strong and absolutely perfect. Thomas had arrived that morning with supplies and stayed to help with the birth. Now he sat beside Eric, smoking his pipe and admiring the new arrival. "She's got her mother's fire," he observed as the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "And her stubbornness," Eric added fondly. "What will you name her?" Eric looked down at his daughter, this miracle child who represented everything good he'd found in his life. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Inside, Mary Catherine woke to the sound of voices on the porch. She rose carefully and moved to the window, where she could see her husband holding their child against the backdrop of the lake they both loved. The scar on her forehead caught the afternoon light, but she didn't flinch from her reflection in the glass. Instead, she smiled. She'd been marked as the devil's property, cast out and branded and hunted. But love had found her anyway. Love had called her angel. Love had given her a home, a husband, and now a daughter. The mark would always be there, a reminder of how cruel the world could be. But it was also a reminder of how much stronger she was than the cruelty. Mary Catherine joined her family on the porch, settling beside Eric as he placed baby Hope in her arms. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She's ours," Eric replied, and in those 2 words was everything that mattered. As the sun set over their lake, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Mary Catherine Jacobson held her daughter close and knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who had been marked as cursed had become a woman blessed beyond measure, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, low and lonely and free. He harbored a witch, lived in sin with the devil's property, committed violence in your defense. Blackwood shook his head. His soul is stained with your corruption. But if I come willingly, you'll leave him alone? If you confess your sins and accept righteous judgment, his part in this evil might be overlooked. Mary Catherine looked around the canyon, at the steep walls and single exit. These men had followed her across half a continent. They would never stop, unless she stopped them first. Very well, she said quietly. I confess. Blackwood leaned forward eagerly. Speak your sins, witch. I confess, Mary Catherine said, her voice growing stronger, that I healed the sick when I could. I comforted the dying. I showed mercy to those who had none. Her eyes blazed. And I confess that I found love with a good man who saw past your cruelty to the person underneath. Blackwood's face darkened. Mock God if you will. It only proves your damnation. I'm not mocking God, Mary Catherine said. I'm mocking you. The preacher raised his hand to strike her, but froze as a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. Eric stepped out from behind a boulder, his Henry rifle trained on Blackwood's chest. Thomas emerged from the opposite side, armed with a shotgun. Gentlemen, Eric said pleasantly, I believe you're trespassing. Blackwood's companions reached for their weapons, but Thomas's voice stopped them. Wouldn't advise it. These rocks make bullets bounce in interesting directions. This is God's work, Blackwood snarled. You cannot interfere with divine judgment. Divine judgment? Eric stepped closer, his rifle never wavering. 3 men chasing 1 woman across 1,000 miles? Sounds more like obsession to me. She's marked, branded as the devil's own. She's branded by cowards who needed someone to blame for their failures. Eric's voice was deadly quiet. The only evil I see here is 3 grown men terrorizing someone who's done them no harm. Mary Catherine felt tears of gratitude burn her eyes. He'd come for her. Despite her note, despite her attempt to protect him, he'd come. Eric, she said softly. I'm here, Angel. I'm here. Blackwood's face twisted with rage. Angel? You call this marked abomination an angel? Every day, Eric said simply. Because that's what she is. The preacher lunged forward, perhaps thinking to grab Mary Catherine, but Eric's rifle butt caught him in the solar plexus. Blackwood crumpled, gasping. Thomas, Eric said without looking away from the other 2 men. What do you think we should do with trespassers who threaten our womenfolk? In my grandmother's day, Thomas mused, we had ways of dealing with men who couldn't leave well enough alone. The 2 remaining men looked between their wheezing leader and the business ends of 2 very serious weapons. We'll go, one of them said quickly. Just let us collect the preacher, and we'll head back east. Good decision. Eric stepped back but kept his rifle ready. But I want to be clear about something first. He looked directly at Blackwood, who was slowly getting his breath back. If any of you ever come near my wife again, if you even think about her, I will find you. And when I do, it won't be a conversation. It will be a funeral. Are we understood? Blackwood's eyes burned with impotent fury, but he nodded. Perfectly understood. As the 3 men gathered themselves and rode away, Mary Catherine finally allowed herself to breathe. How did you find me? She asked. Thomas tracks better than anyone alive, Eric said, pulling her into his arms. And you left a trail a blind man could follow. I was trying to protect you. I know, but that's not how this works. He cupped her face in his hands. We protect each other, together. Mary Catherine leaned into his touch, feeling the last of her fear drain away. Together. They returned to the trading post as the first snows of winter began to fall. The building stood exactly as they'd left it, but something had changed in Mary Catherine. She walked through their home with new eyes, seeing not a place of hiding, but a place of belonging. That evening, as they sat by the fire sorting through mail that had accumulated during their absence, Mary Catherine spoke. I want to remove the bandage, she said quietly. Eric looked up from a letter he'd been reading. Are you sure? I've been hiding for too long. Behind bandages, behind shame, behind fear. She touched the scar through the cloth. It's time to stop. Eric set down the letter and moved to sit beside her. Whatever you decide, I support. Mary Catherine reached up and slowly unwound the bandage from her forehead. The scar was fully healed now, a thin white cross against her pale skin. It would always be visible, but it no longer looked angry or infected. It looked like what it was, a mark of survival. There, she said, setting the bandage aside. No more hiding. Eric traced the scar with one gentle finger. Benito. But brands don't make truth any more than trials do. The courtroom murmured at her response. Mary Catherine continued. My husband saw past the mark on my forehead to the person underneath. That's what good people do. They look for truth, not convenient lies. When the defense rested, Mary Catherine was cautiously optimistic. The jury had listened. The evidence was strong. Morrison had presented a compelling case for self-defense. But she'd learned not to trust in justice too completely. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Mary Catherine held her breath. We find the defendant not guilty by reason of self-defense. The courtroom erupted. Mary Catherine felt her knees give way with relief. Eric closed his eyes and took his first deep breath as a free man in 7 years. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Mary Catherine ignored them, focused only on Eric's arms around her, solid and real and safe. It's over, he whispered into her hair. It's over, she agreed. But as they walked away from the courthouse, Mary Catherine caught sight of a familiar figure in the crowd. Patterson, the marshal's deputy who'd made the journey so unpleasant, was watching them with cold eyes. Something in his expression made her shiver. They spent one night in Minneapolis, celebrating their freedom at a proper hotel with hot baths and clean sheets. But both of them were eager to return to their real life at the trading post. The city felt too crowded, too complicated, after months of frontier simplicity. Ready to go home? Eric asked over breakfast. More than ready. They bought supplies and 2 good horses, then started the long journey back to their lake. But they weren't traveling alone. Thomas Whitefeather had come to Minneapolis for the trial, bringing news from their territory. Trading post is secure, he reported as they made camp their first night out. I've been checking on it, keeping the squirrels out. Any other news? Eric asked. Thomas glanced at Mary Catherine, then back to Eric. Some folks been asking questions. About your woman, specifically. Mary Catherine felt ice form in her stomach. What kind of questions? Religious types from back east, looking for a branded witch named Mary Catherine Brennan. Eric's face went hard. How many? 3 that I saw. Could be more. Mary Catherine stared into the fire, her mind racing. Pastor Blackwood? One of them might have been a preacher, Thomas confirmed. Black coat, white collar, mean eyes. They followed us, Mary Catherine said quietly. All this way, all this time. Eric reached for her hand. It doesn't matter. The trial's over. We're free to go anywhere. Are we? Mary Catherine looked between the 2 men. These aren't lawmen with warrants. These are zealots with a mission. They won't stop until they finish what they started. Thomas nodded grimly. Woman's right. Religious fanatics don't give up. They think God's on their side. That night, as Eric slept, Mary Catherine sat by the dying fire and made a decision that would define the rest of their lives. When morning came, she was gone. Eric woke to find only a note written in Mary Catherine's careful hand. My beloved Eric, I cannot let them destroy what we've built. By the time you read this, I'll be far from here, leading them away from you and our home. Don't follow me. Please, live the life you've earned, free from my shadows. I love you more than words can say. Your angel, always. Eric roared her name into the morning sky, but the forest swallowed his voice without echo. Thomas found horse tracks leading south, toward the main road. She's got maybe 2 hours on us. Then we ride, Eric said, already saddling his mount. Mary Catherine pushed her horse hard through the morning, following the main trail that led away from their territory. She'd taken the older, slower mount deliberately, knowing Eric would catch up if she made it too easy. But she needed time to think. to plan, to figure out how to end this pursuit once and for all. The trail wound through dense forest, perfect for what she had in mind. By midday, she could hear horses behind her, multiple riders moving fast. Not Eric. He would be more cautious, more quiet. These were her pursuers, confident in their righteousness. Mary Catherine found what she was looking for, a narrow canyon with steep walls and only one way in or out. She rode to the far end and waited. They came thundering in like the wrath of God. 3 men on lathered horses, black coats flapping like crow wings. Pastor Blackwood led them, older but no less fanatical than she remembered. "Mary Catherine Brennan," he called as they surrounded her. "The devil's whore has led us quite a chase." "Pastor," she said calmly, "you're looking well for a man who's ridden so far to persecute an innocent woman." Blackwood's eyes glittered with zealous fire. "Innocent? You corrupted a good man, led him into sin and violence. I married him, outside my window. Even if it gets you hanged? Especially then. I'd rather die having loved you than live alone for the rest of my life." Mary Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too. I know you do. And that's enough for whatever comes next." "I know you do. And that's enough for whatever comes next." Minneapolis in late autumn was gray and cold, full of smoke and noise and the kind of hustle that made frontier life seem peaceful by comparison. The jail was a stone building that squatted like a toad in the center of the city. As they approached it, Mary Catherine felt her throat tighten with memories of her own trial, her own condemnation. "Mrs. Jacobson," Marshal Hendricks said as they dismounted, "you're free to find lodging wherever you like. The trial won't start for at least a week." "I'd like to see my husband settled first." Hendricks nodded. "Fair enough." Inside the jail, Eric was processed with efficient brutality. They took his belongings, his boots, even his belt. Mary Catherine watched each small humiliation and felt her anger grow. "Can I speak to him privately?" she asked. The jailer looked to Hendricks, who nodded. 5 minutes. Mary Catherine approached Eric's cell, hating the iron bars between them. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I've been in worse places." Eric managed a smile. "How are you?" "Scared, angry, determined to find a lawyer who can actually help us." "Mary Catherine, about what I said on the trail." "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" Eric reached through the bars to touch her face. "I remember." That evening, Mary Catherine found lodging at a modest boarding house and set about learning everything she could about the Pemberton case. The city newspapers had covered it extensively 7 years ago, and the librarian was helpful in finding the archived articles. The picture that emerged was complex and troubling. Richard Pemberton had indeed been a banker, but he'd also been involved in a scheme to defraud immigrant farmers of their land. Eric's family had been among his victims. The shooting had occurred when Eric confronted Pemberton at his home, demanding the return of stolen documents. According to the newspapers, Pemberton's family claimed it was cold-blooded murder, but the police reports, which Mary Catherine obtained through careful questioning and small bribes, told a different story. Eric had been found wounded at the scene, and Pemberton's gun had been fired. It looked more like self-defense than murder. Mary Catherine spent her days researching and her evenings visiting Eric. On the 4th day, she finally found what she was looking for, a lawyer willing to take the case. James Morrison was young, idealistic, and hungry for a case that might make his reputation. When Mary Catherine explained the evidence she'd uncovered, his eyes lit up with possibility. "This could work," he said, spreading the documents across his desk. "If we can prove Pemberton drew first, if we can establish the fraud." "What do you need from me?" Morrison looked at her assessingly. "Everything you can tell me about your husband's character. Witnesses who can testify to his good reputation. Evidence that he's lived an honest life since leaving Minneapolis." Mary Catherine thought of Thomas Whitefeather, of the trappers who'd respected Eric, of the community they'd built together. "I can get you that," she said. The trial began on a cold Monday in November. The courtroom was packed with curiosity seekers, journalists, and members of the Pemberton family. Mary Catherine sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and no covering over her scar. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She had nothing to hide anymore. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Eric Jacobson had murdered Richard Pemberton in cold blood, motivated by a business dispute. They painted Eric as a violent drifter who'd killed a respected businessman and fled like a coward. But Morrison was prepared. He presented the police reports showing Pemberton's gun had been fired. He brought in witnesses who testified about the banker's fraudulent schemes. Most powerfully, he put Mary Catherine on the stand. "Mrs. Jacobson," Morrison said gently, "please tell the court how you met your husband." Mary Catherine looked directly at the jury, her voice clear and steady. "I was starving and freezing outside his trading post. He brought me inside, fed me, and gave me shelter without asking for anything in return." "Did he know about your circumstances?" Mary Catherine touched her scar unconsciously. "He knew I'd been branded and cast out. He knew I had nothing to offer him. He helped me anyway." "Why do you think he did that?" "Because he's a good man. The kind of man who sees someone in need and acts, not the kind who shoots a man in cold blood." The prosecutor tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting she was biased and unreliable. Mary Catherine appeared in the doorway beside Eric. The marshal's eyes flicked to her, then widened slightly as he noticed the scar on her forehead. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim, "this is law business. You might want to step inside." "This is my husband," Mary Catherine said firmly. "Where he goes, I go." Hendricks frowned. "Husband? You got papers?" "We have a marriage," Eric said, "witnessed and blessed." "By what authority?" "By the authority of two people who love each other," Mary Catherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. One of the men behind Hendricks laughed. "Look at that mark on her head, Marshal. She's been branded. Probably a witch or a whore." Mary Catherine flinched, but Eric stepped in front of her. "Watch your mouth," he said quietly. The man who'd spoken reached for his gun, but Hendricks held up a hand. "Easy, Patterson. We're here for Jacobson, not his woman." "She might be an accomplice," Patterson argued, "harboring a fugitive." "She didn't know about my past when we married," Eric said. "Any crime is mine alone." Mary Catherine looked at him in surprise. It was a lie. She'd known about Minneapolis almost from the beginning, but she understood why he'd said it. "That so?" Hendricks asked her. Mary Catherine met his eyes steadily. "My husband is a good man, Marshal. Whatever happened in Minneapolis, it wasn't murder. That's for a judge to decide." Hendricks pulled out shackles. "Turn around, Jacobson." Eric started to comply, then stopped. "What happens to my wife?" "Not my concern." "It is mine." Eric's voice was firm. "She comes with me, or I don't go quietly." Patterson snorted. "You ain't in a position to make demands." "Actually, I am." Eric gestured slightly toward the trading post. "You see, Marshal, this building is full of gunpowder, ammunition, and other volatile supplies. Wouldn't take much to turn it into a very large explosion." Hendricks narrowed his eyes. "You threatening to blow yourself up?" "I'm pointing out that a dead fugitive is no good to anyone, but a cooperative one who brings his wife along for the trial, that's a man who might be willing to testify about other crimes he's witnessed over the years." Mary Catherine held her breath. It was a dangerous gamble. Hendricks considered for a long moment. "You got information worth trading?" "I might." The marshal looked between Eric and Mary Catherine, weighing his options. "Fine," he said finally. "She can come, but any trouble from either of you, and I'll leave her in the first jail we pass." As Eric submitted to the shackles, Mary Catherine packed quickly: clothes, money, and the small carved horse Eric had made her for Christmas. Everything else could be replaced. Before they left, Eric managed to whisper to her, "Thomas Whitefeather, tell him what happened. He'll get word to people who can help." Mary Catherine nodded, filing the information away. As they rode away from the trading post, she looked back once at the place where she'd learned to be happy. Then she faced forward and rode toward whatever came next. The journey to Minneapolis took 3 weeks. Mary Catherine quickly learned that traveling as the wife of a prisoner was only marginally better than traveling as a prisoner herself. The accommodations were poor, the food was worse, and Patterson seemed to take pleasure in making crude comments about her appearance and past. "Bet she was grateful when you took her in," he said to Eric one evening as they made camp. "Women with a brand like that don't get many offers." Eric strained against his shackles, but Hendricks had been careful to keep him secured. That's enough, Patterson, the marshal warned. I'm just saying, a man's got to wonder what kind of services she provided in exchange for room and board. Mary Catherine had endured worse insults, but something about Patterson's tone made her skin crawl. She could see the same discomfort in Hendricks' face. My wife kept the books and managed supplies, Eric said evenly. Same as any business partner. Sure she did. Patterson grinned nastily. And I'm the King of England. That night, Mary Catherine couldn't sleep. She lay wrapped in her thin blanket, listening to Patterson's snores and Eric's quiet breathing, and tried not to think about what waited for them in Minneapolis. A trial for murder, probably conviction, given the victim's family connections, and then she pushed the thought away, one day at a time. That's how she'd survived everything else. Mary Catherine? Eric's voice was barely a whisper. I'm awake. When we get to Minneapolis, if things go badly, they won't. If they do, he continued gently, I want you to go back to the trading post. Thomas will help you. I'm not leaving you. You may not have a choice. Mary Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Do you regret marrying me, knowing it might end like this? Never, Eric said immediately. Best thing I ever did was open that door when you were freezing out.